I've lost two daughters, and for people to tell me he didn't act right, I take great offense to. I think I could write the book on how you should act. With my first daughter, it was an accident. They were on their way to a museum at noon on Friday, and they got hit by a truck. Both her and her special friend were killed. JONBENET was taken intentionally by another human being. That is far worse to deal with.
There's no doubt John is being genuine here, that JONBENET's death was far worse to deal with than his daughter Beth's death. Of course, John and Patsy were never suspects in Beth's death, which is one difference. Another difference is that the grand jury seemed to think JONBENET's death was preventable. This is an excerpt from CNN just dealing with the grand jury indictments. The grand jury had alleged that Patricia Paul Ramsey, who died from ovarian cancer in 2006, and husband John did permit a child to be unreasonably placed in a situation which posed a threat of injury to the child's life or health. It goes on to say, the grand jury also had alleged that each parent did render assistance to a person with intent to hinder, delay, and prevent the discovery. The documents provide no further details on who that person was. Now, if JONBENET's death was preventable, and I suspect it was, then it would be far worse to deal with. If anything, it's been a 28-year unresolved nightmare for the authorities in Boulder.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Let's now review our statement analysis of the rest of the interview on Larry King Live. And I have to say, you can only do effective statement analysis if you are very au fait with the entire fabric of a case, and you're about to see whether that's the case here. You can evaluate my statement analysis, but the test of good statement analysis is if you know you've got a lot of background on a particular case. How do you get background? Well, from a lot of reading, from a lot of research, from a lot of time spent studying a case. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Bear in mind, coming on Netflix just, I think it's 5 days away now, is a little documentary on the Ramsey case. We're going to be looking at that, so watch this space. If you are finding these continued deep dives into the case worthwhile, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and please do if you haven't already. And let's get started. Number one, does your gut tell you it's someone who knew her? And that is what Larry asks John and Patsy, sort of a little bit past the 23-minute mark. But let me direct that question to you. What does your gut tell you? In March 2000, this was actually a fantastic question. Remember, as per Aunt's report and also the Ramsey's own version in their book, The Death of Innocence, all of their original suspects were insiders who knew them. Patsy thought it might be the housekeeper, while John thought it could be someone from work, someone from Access Graphics. The timbre of the ransom note telling John to use that good southern common sense and not to grow a brain also suggests familiarity. Now, when John stumbles over his words, I first thought he was about to say that whatever was behind the killing, it was personal, and he definitely was about to enunciate a P word. But I think the word he was looking for was purposeful, which is similar to intentional. But Larry seems to sort of take a cue from this assumption, which leads him to ask,
does your gut tell you it's someone who knew her?
I don't really think they...
Have a gut on something like this? Why you, why her?
I don't know.
What Larry's asking through that question, does your gut tell you it's someone who knew her? It's another way of saying, do you think it was personal? Do you think it was someone she knew? It's actually crazy when Larry asked John at 23:54, John is actually unable to answer. Just have a look. He doesn't answer. Instead, he does that characteristic lip lick. Check it out in slow motion.
Does your gut tell you it's someone who knew her?
I don't really.
Does your gut tell you it's someone who knew her?
I don't really think they.
Have a gut on something like this? Why you, why her?
I don't know.
We told the police when they first asked us who do you have any ideas, we said, look, we don't know anybody this evil.
And now let's watch again at 0.25. That's the playback speed.
You got tell you it's someone who knew her?
I don't really think they.
Have a gut on something like this? Why you, why her?
If you watch carefully, there's a sigh, there's tension, there's a release of tension when John actually addresses the question. But to start off with, it's interesting that he doesn't answer. It seems like Larry's question catches him totally off guard. Does your gut tell you it's someone who knew her? It seems to be a question that strikes very close to home. It's very on the chin. And he doesn't answer. He can't answer. Instead, Patsy helpfully jumps in here and answers for him. And her answer is basically, I don't know.
I don't know.
We told the police when this.
And then John recovers and begins storytelling. Now, again, it's actually incredible that because what we've just seen, because Patsy just a moment ago, we dealt with it in the previous analysis, just a moment ago was saying how much she liked DA Alex Hunter. She's praising him for his determination and because he said that they would stop at nothing to find the real killer. And now Larry is bringing the conversation back to the real killer. And yet that enthusiasm suddenly evaporates when Larry asks who they think the killer is. I mean, everyone seems to have an opinion on this except them. Does that make sense? I also want to review what John has said in the past that John Douglas told him, when he profiled the killer in this case. Remember, John Douglas was part of Team Ramsey very early on, even before I think they went on to CNN. He told John that it was personal and it was committed by someone who was very angry with John, an assessment that may not be wrong after all. Let's have a look at that from these excerpts from Law and Disorder by John Douglas. These are his own words. He said, I believe the intruder to be someone who had a grudge against John Ramsey. Now, think about that question again from Larry. Does your gut tell you it's someone who knew her? Well, what do you think John Douglas's gut is telling him? Well, he's saying it is personal. He's saying, I believe the intruder to be someone who had a grudge against John Ramsey. Later on, he says, I thought it more likely the obsession was with her father, with JONBENET's father, again reiterating that I think it was personal. And yet here, John is silent about it. What's happened to the personal vendetta of the kidnapper? I mean, 28 years later, what has happened to the inside job? To someone who has got some kind of personal grudge against John, what's happened to that? Now, literally every suspect we see, and it's going to be interesting to see in this documentary that's coming out in 5 days, what's happened to the personal grudge? Because literally every suspect now is someone who knew nothing about the Ramseys only until after JONBENET's death. Think about John Mark Carr. He wasn't even on the same continent when he was arrested. And the incredible thing, if you have got a lot of respect for John Douglas, can you believe that John Douglas actually thought when John Mark Carr was arrested that they'd found the killer of JONBENET? That's also in his book. And I think that's where it's one little area where John Douglas and I differ. When John Mark Carr was identified, I thought, this is crazy. There's no way it's John Mark Carr. And yet he seemed to think, definitely this could be him. What does that tell you about John Douglas's understanding of this case how many years later? Gary Oliver was clearly a total stranger to the Ramseys and the Ramseys to him. And look how his name has come up lately. And I wouldn't be surprised if it comes up in 5 days' time in this documentary. But that is how the narrative has evolved over time. Whatever sticks, we'll go with that. John's story now that the grand jury have quote-unquote exonerated them, when I say now I mean actually 2000, the grand jury have quote-unquote exonerated them in the public imagination. His story now is that we don't know anyone this evil.
Something like this. Why you, why her?
I don't know.
We told the police when they first asked us, who do you have any ideas? We said, look, we don't know anybody this evil. This was an evil person that did this.
But they did seem to know someone that evil on the day after Christmas. Patsy knew someone that evil, and John seemed to know someone that evil. You know, when the cops asked him who they thought may have done it. And I want you to watch carefully just the sigh, the tension, and the release of tension when John addresses the question.
Does your gut tell you it's someone who knew her?
I don't really think they
Have a gut on something?
Can you hear John sighing when he hears that question? Let's play it again, this time without the sound.
Does your gut tell you it's someone who knew her?
I don't really think they
Have a gut on something like this?
Number 2, John asks rhetorically, did we know them? I can't imagine that we did. And it's quite interesting that it's them, it's plural, it's not that person, that somebody. Now, it's not actually true that when the police asked that John and Patsy said, we don't know anyone this evil. On the day after Christmas, during the kidnapping phase, before JONBENET's body had even been found, the housekeeper was being implicated by Patsy, and someone from Access Graphic, Jeff Merrick, I believe, was being implicated by John, right? But even in 1998, when John and Patsy were interviewed, Bill McReynolds was mentioned. I think Lou Smith asked John point blank, who is your number one suspect? And John answered effectively, Santa Claus. And this was in the context of the pineapple coming up in the autopsy evidence, and it appeared that JONBENET had to have gone downstairs with someone she knew. So this was still within this whole construct of someone she knew, an insider, right? And then JONBENET willingly ingested or was fed pineapple. And it was John's theory then in 1998 that it had to be someone she knew and trusted. Lou Smith asked John at the time, do you have any ideas who this could be? John Ramsey answered, Bill McReynolds. He's the only Santa Claus I know, and that she knows. Now, here we are in March 2000, and John is basically rubbishing John Douglas's hypothesis, as well as rubbishing the original idea, which was that it was personal, that it was someone familiar with the Ramseys. Number 3, this case is going to be solved with the help of the public. That was one of the primary reasons we wrote the book. And this is something that John says in response to a caller. Let's listen to that.
This case is going to be solved through the help of the public. That was one of the primary reasons we wrote the book. And
I do believe that's true, that the Ramseys want the public to solve the case. That's where they want the case solved. And they want a DNA match to magically materialize someday. And they want the public to think, you know what, if a DNA match hasn't come up after 28 years, maybe it'll come up after another 28 years. Let's just wait. Of course, a composite profile will never be matched. And if the public accept this challenge to wait for a DNA match, well, I think that suits the Ramseys just perfectly. I also agree with John that the primary reason the Ramseys wrote the book was to have the public solve, that's solve in inverted commas, solve the case within the schema that they have provided, which is how you control the narrative. And you'll notice when John says, and that's how this case is going to be solved, he shakes his head.
that's how this case is going to be solved.
And you must get
Number 4, just a quick one. About 1 out of 10 is a hate message, Larry. That's all?
some anger too, right?
Yes, it is.
I mean, you must get.
About 1 out of 10 is
That's all?
a hate message, yeah.
Well, I think if we do some statement analysis on Larry, there's a little clue in somewhere in there about what Larry really thinks, isn't it? Number 5, this is from the caller. The caller says, why did you hide behind your attorneys and why did you hide behind public relations? And let me just stop right there and ask you, yes or no, do you think the Ramseys, look where we are now, 28 years later, do you think the Ramseys hid behind attorneys? It's a simple question, yes or no. And did they hide behind public relations? Simple question, yes or no. Do you know the answer to that? I mean, you should, after 28 years, you should know the answer. Do you?
Your attorneys, and why did you hire a public relations firm to represent?
Now, I think it's clear from this interview and from many, if you've followed the Ramseys giving interviews, that this question has come up quite a lot, and John seems to say, no, we weren't hiding behind attorneys. Now, this is obviously a caller who in March 2000 was listening to the interview and didn't buy their first answer to Larry. I mean, I didn't either. And just have a look at Patsy's body language when this question is posed. She's clearly nervous. She adjusts her position. She's pursing her lips. She's hunching her shoulders and clasping her hands in front of her. She's clearly not comfortable by where this question is going. Bear in mind, this is totally random. This is members of the public being sort of invited onto the show, which is in a way giving them a sense of what the public think of them. And bear in mind, if you're trying to do PR, is this going to make you look good? What the public really think of you? And while Patsy does all of this, John does his customary licking of lips.
Statement in your position you of being guilty, and why did you hide behind your attorneys, and why did you hire a public relations firm to represent you?
Well, we asked the last two already.
Now, if you watch this clip a few times, you'll also notice Patsy shake her head slightly. The caller mentions the word guilty, and Patsy is just shaking her head. And Patsy also glances, looks like a somewhat worried glance, straight at the camera. And of course, Larry helpfully rescues the Ramseys from this sticky question, saying, well, they've already answered it, and also saying that the attorneys hired the PR firm. John makes a joke here saying he wishes he knew who the PR firm was because he hasn't gotten the bill, basically implying that he's completely unaware of it and that it must be getting huge by now. Well, how about Russell Partners, a Denver-based crisis PR specialist? Didn't the Ramseys use them? And we'll get to that in a second, but let's just have a look at Patsy and John's body language again regarding this question.
Firm to represent.
Well, we asked the last two already, and they said the attorneys hired the PR firm to handle the calls, right? And
yeah, now the governor certainly has accused us of continuing to hide behind our attorneys and our PR firm, and I wish that he would tell me who this PR firm is because I've not gotten a bill, and it must be getting huge by now.
That's quite interesting, just the way that John is making a joke, that he's sort of coming out swinging there. You know, there's a little bit of verve, spirit in his answer. You know, there's definitely some pushback there. But in terms of the meat and potatoes of his answer, where he says, you know, basically saying, I don't know who the PR person is. I haven't gotten the bill. This tactic, I think, is used quite often, including, in my opinion, in the Amanda Knox case. See, the counter-narrative relies on the ignorance of the viewer not to know these details. And I can tell you, it's a lot of work to get them, even when you know where to find them. It's a lot of work. I mean, I've spent the whole afternoon getting the details you're listening to now, and I'm aware that they exist. It's still not that easy to. Here are 3 more names besides Pat Corton's. And bear in mind, this expose about PR people hired by the Ramseys was published in Vanity Fair in October 1997, just months after JONBENET's death, and also 3 years prior to what we're watching here, to the Ramseys' interview with Larry. So listen to this. This is from Vanity Fair. Ramsey decided that his wife should have her own lawyers, and he retained Patrick Burke and Patrick Furman. That seems to be 2 lawyers. Within a week of the murder, a media consultant named Pat Corton was also brought aboard, later to be replaced by Rachel Zimmer and Lori Wagner. In July, Denver's premier publicist Charles Russell was added to the payroll. So if you think about that, within about 7 months of JONBENET's death, you had Pat Corton, that's 1, Rachel Zimmer, 2, Laurie Wagner, 3, and Charles Russell, that's 4. That's quite a lot. That's quite a lot in 6 months, 7 months. Then they go on to talk about after the police tried to question Ramsey's first wife in Atlanta, her name is Lucinda Porsche. He also hired a lawyer there named James Jenkins. We know that Pat Corton was one individual hired who was an expert in crisis management, as well as a former Reagan administration spokesman for the Justice Department. I don't think that he came cheap. Then this from the Daily Camera, and it's under title JonBenet Ramsey's Mom Pens Fifth Sample. So it was obviously, it's May 21st, 1997. It's within 4 or 5 months of the incident. And they say, John Ramsey, president of Boulder-based company distributor Access Graphics, returned to work. Then John will usually do an introduction and front part of the question and answer session. Company spokesman Laurie Wagner said. So I guess you could say, well, we didn't hire a PR person, but Access Graphics did, right? Then also from the same publication, Daily Camera, investigators rejected a 5th handwriting sample offer proposed Thursday, according to family spokeswoman Rachel Zimmer. Zimmer declined to elaborate on Tuesday's handwriting sample. Now, of course, by 1999, the Ramseys had also hired a civil litigator in the form of Lynn Wood, who was another form of PR control. Just think about that. Someone says something you don't like, Lynn to the rescue. And in fact, the very next night, talking about on Larry King, the very next night, when Detective Steve Thomas came on, and he would say some things that weren't very good for this whole PR exercise, well, they would then authorize Lynn Wood to sue Steve Thomas. His book was a target, but it was unsuccessfully suppressed. But I guess that's one way of doing a certain amount of PR as well, through suppression, and using your lawyer as a spokesman, as Linwood would do for the next decade. If I recall, Linwood would later brag that he'd earned more out of the Ramsey case than he'd guesstimated Ramsey housekeeper attorney Darnay Hoffman had earned in his entire career. And although I know we're going down a little bit of a tangent, I think this one is worth going down, right? I'll give you the source for this, but let's first just read this. This is Darnay Hoffman and Linwood sparring during a deposition, which is why it's on record. Hoffman says, "Oh, I hope so." And I hope, Linwood says, "and it would be the pleasure of my career when I take you down, and that day may yet come, because you still run your mouth to the media so much that you're going to get yourself sued eventually. You're going to get your experts sued eventually. So you just keep the business coming, Darnay. It's really good for my pocketbook. I'm taking a recess." Hoffman: "I know in this case that the Ramseys aren't paying a penny. The insurance company is paying you finally, okay, which is nice." Wood: "Hey, I made more money handling the Ramsey case than you've made in your whole damn career practicing law, Darnay." Hoffman says something about, instead of settling for chump change, which you've done in all these other cases, you're actually getting paid a decent. And then Wood reiterates, insists, "I've made more money in the Ramsey case than you've made in your entire career as a lawyer. You want to bet on that?" Do you want to know the date of these statements? Well, it's May 2002, 2 years after the interview on Larry King about not being shielded by lawyers. I'm not going to take it further than that, but do look out for my next analysis on the Amanda Knox case, where we'll look at what is wrong with this picture, where we'll look at some of the reenactment footage and what really happened on November 2nd. Look out for that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.